What is up, you guys? It's ZXRyuu, and today we're going to be continuing through our journey of equipment setup, and we're going to talk about capture cards today, as well as the Framemeister a little bit. So we'll be starting with the Framemeister, just giving a basic overview of what it is and why you might want to use it, and then we'll move into talking more about capture cards and upscalers and just different things you want to do when you go to record your retro games. So with that, let's go ahead and start with the Framemeister. Okay, so the first item to talk about is the Framemeister. So this is a Framemeister is short for the full name. The full name is XRGB-mini Framemeister. It's made by a company called Magnavox, and they're from Japan. So this is a Japanese piece of equipment, and it's a really, really nice piece of equipment. I really like using it. It has a ton of inputs on it, a ton of outputs on it, and or I guess just one output on it. It doesn't have a ton of outputs. It has one HDMI output on it, but it does have a ton of inputs on it, and it's just a really nice piece of equipment. I originally got into using the Framemeister when I started looking into upscaling my old retro consoles to something that was a little bit more current so I could run it on my HD TV and this kind of thing. So I was looking into just different upscaling boxes and came across a lot of people saying that the Framemeister was a good piece of equipment to use. The problem with it, well, I mean, it's got several problems, but I mean, the initial problem I had with it is it costs about $336 as of this video to buy it, and that's about how much it was when I purchased it. It's like 38,000 yen or something like that if you want to buy it in Japan, so it's really, really expensive, but it really does a good job. It really handles 240p really well. It struggles in some other areas, like 480p kind of has some issues, and 480i and some other things just look kind of strange on the Framemeister sometimes, depending on what game you're playing and what settings you're using. It has so many settings. You can change a lot of things about it. So I'm not going to really cover a whole lot about the settings or this kind of thing, but I did want to just start out by saying that the Framemeister is the piece of equipment that we use the most for recording videos. And the reason being is that we use it kind of as a signal normalizer, I guess. So a whole different games run at different resolutions, and the Framemeister is an upscaler, meaning it takes the resolution like 240p or this kind of thing and it upscales it to 1080p so that it can fit on your HD TV screen and that it looks better on your HD TV screen than if you were to just simply plug in the composite or the RF or the component or this kind of thing directly into your HD TV. It turns up the resolution from whatever the input is to a standard 1080p. But you can use different resolutions. I mean, you can scale all the way down to, I believe, 800 by 600. I think it'll run it at that resolution, and then you can run it all the way up to 1080p. Again, some of the information on this video might or might not be true, I guess, just as a disclaimer, because I haven't used it as in-depth as possible. I've just used it to upscale consoles to 1080p instead of messing around with a lot of the settings, and I'll get into that more when we start talking about recording. But the Framemeister has a bunch of inputs on it. The main one that we use is the RGB in, which is this one right here in the front. And it's got some labels up here on the top so you can see what inputs it has. So it has an AV in, so the composite video, the yellow, red, and white. And then it has S video also on the front, so you can attach S video to that. It has two HDMI inputs on the back, so you can run your HD consoles into this if you really want to. I mean, if you're needing to scale up like your PlayStation TV or this kind of thing that runs at something below 1080p, because after the PlayStation 3, I mean, 1080p was kind of just the standard that you would use, I guess. And then also on the back, it has something called D-terminal. And here in the United States, we're not as familiar with D-terminal, but in Japan, that's kind of their way of getting component. So you just plug this little D-terminal to component adapter into the back. Just attaches like that. You have to buy this separate too. This doesn't come with the Framemeister unit. You have to buy that separate, and then you just attach the audio into the left and right there. And then everything is run into this HDMI out. So this HDMI out ultimately goes to my capture card or to a splitter if I need multiple TVs set up for marathon runs or this kind of thing. So most of the time I use this just to normalize the signal, but there's quite a few other options. Again, since this is a Japanese piece of equipment, the language starts out in Japan, so you have to switch the language to English unless you get a unit and immediately upgrade the BIOS. There's an option to do English BIOS by default. So, and that just gets saved onto this SD micro slot back here. Another thing about the Framemeister too is that you can preload some settings onto it. You can use Firebrand X's profiles that he's created for the Framemeister. He's gone through and done a huge amount of work on it to get all the profiles to look really nice so that when you want to record or stream or this kind of thing, he's made it so that the picture looks really clear and really nice. He's adjusted sharpness and the color and a bunch of different things. So again, I'm not going to go into that, but if you're interested in using the profiles for the Framemeister, it's Firebrand X is the website. You can just Google it or whatever. Another thing about the Framemeister with this RGB in here in the front, we have the 21-pin connectors like this that you've seen in the previous videos, and then it goes to RGB on this side. It's a 9-pin connector, and that's important because later when we talk about some other things, I have some 8-pin connectors, and there's just all sorts of different types of connectors, but you have to use this 9-pin connector to 21-pin RGB on this side. Now, if you're in Europe or your cables are SCART or this kind of thing instead of JP21 like I use JP21 because the Framemeister is a Japanese piece of equipment, and I just found it easier to not have to mess around with all of that stuff. But if you want to use SCART, the Euro SCART, you need to get a separate adapter that looks exactly like this, but it's wired up differently inside, and it's for Euro SCART. So if you're using SCART cables, make sure you get a different adapter. Because if you can't mix JP21 and Euro SCART, they don't work. They're not wired up the same way, and they don't work. You can have some problems with the video. So make sure you're doing either JP21 or SCART. SCART is the kind of more general standard now, I guess. JP21 isn't used as much as it used to be. I think it kind of turned into a war of some kind, I think, a little bit, and I think JP21 might have lost that war because I'm seeing a lot more equipment online that's SCART and available for SCART cables. So it might just make sense at this point in time. If you want to use the Framemeister, just go ahead and get the Euro SCART adapter and just use SCART cables and just go that way. Instead of trying to mess around with JP21 like I did, because I'm trying to just fish around to find cables now for different things that are JP21 specifically instead of Euro SCART. So if you're just starting off, I kind of would recommend that you just go with Euro SCART just to make things easier on yourself, and you get a lot more options where you can do like SCART to component boxes. I haven't been able to locate a JP21 to component box, but if anybody knows about one, certainly leave me a note in the comments and I'll look into it, because I've kind of been looking for such a thing and I haven't been able to find it yet. So anyway, let's go ahead and move on now to some just basic recording and capturing devices and a couple of other upscalers, and yeah, so we'll move on to that. Okay, so if the Framemeister sounds like a way out of your budget, I know it was for me at first. I really had to save for a while in order to get the Framemeister, but I just found that it was just so easy and so convenient that I wouldn't really want to get anything else, so I just saved up my money for it. But if you want to, while I was saving up money for the Framemeister, I came across this AVerMedia box. Label's upside down. There we go. AVerMedia box. Again, this stuff isn't sponsored. This is just stuff I have. This is just stuff I've used. This isn't sponsored stuff. So this is just the equipment I have on hand, just to show you some different options that you can use. So it has a USB connection for power. You can either use like a little power brick, like you convert USB to the 2-prong, and you can plug this directly into the wall. Just be aware it uses a lot of power. I had it plugged into a power strip at one point that was always on, and it actually doubled my electric bill because of how much power it used, because it's always active. So make sure that you unplug it when you're not using it, because it does take a lot of power. The other thing you can do is you can plug it into the USB port on your computer. It's USB 2. So, then it would only power on when your computer's on, or this kind of thing. And then it has HDMI out on the back. So you can take the composite video, just the yellow, white, and red. You can connect the composite video to your retro consoles or this kind of thing. And this box will upscale the image to 480p. Now, kind of getting into resolutions a little bit, most capture cards nowadays, at least the ones that I have a minimum requirement of 480i. So you need to have some way of getting the signal either to 480i or 480p. So actually this box actually goes up to 480i, but there is a component version of this as well. And the model numbers for these are ET111 and ET113. So the component one is 113. And so same thing, it's got USB. You can attach that to your computer or plug it in. And then it has the component breakout on the other side. So you have the YPBPR, and then you have the two audio connectors over here. And this box will scale up to 480p. So it meets the minimum requirements of attaching to most capture devices. The ones that I use are the AVerMedia LGX Live Gamer Extreme, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit when we get to it. But I used this little adapter to kind of get me over the problem, I guess, of having to have a minimum resolution that my capture card supported. And I think actually now with some of the 4K capture cards, you really need to make sure that you check the resolutions that these have for requirements on these capture cards, because you have to meet certain specs in order to start recording, unfortunately. So if you have old consoles like the SNES or the Sega Genesis or the Neo Geo, something that's even older or whatever, you need to be able to at least plug it into an adapter to get it up to 480i instead of 240p, because a lot of the stuff doesn't run on 240p anymore. It's got to be at least 480i. And there's some problems with that you have to kind of adjust a little bit later on. So we'll talk about that when we get to recording. The other option that you can do is if you want to record S-video, you have to use a different kind of capture card. This is the Elgato Game Capture HD. And this was kind of the second box that I got when I was still trying to get money for the Framemeister. It has an HDMI in. It's kind of pre-rated to run the PS4, the PS3 over component, and then the PS4 and the Xbox One over HDMI. So you can run HDMI into this, and then you can run HDMI out. It's USB powered, so you can just plug it into your computer, because you need to use that for like OBS or whatever software, or the included software that Elgato gives you for this unit. And I really like this box. It has a 9, or excuse me, it doesn't have a 9. It has an 8-pin connector on this side for AV in, and you can plug in. They give you the component one in the box, so you can just plug that directly in here, and then run your game console in here, and then run HDMI out to your TV. And the pass-through that this box has is lagless, so you can play directly on it on your HD TV, and it looks and plays okay. So because this box will go down as low as 240p. So this is a really good box if you're wanting to record retro consoles. The only thing I don't like about it, though, is the pass-through is lagless, but the recording has a 2-second delay on it. So if you watch like our Mega Man X3 race, one of the early ones, you'll see that the Gray Dragon's window isn't synchronized, even though we start the race at the same time. It was because this box has a 2-second delay on it. So it's really good. I mean, I really like it, but it does have some delay in it. But if that isn't a problem for you for recording, then this is a great option. This Elgato Game Capture HD. And the trouble is they don't really make these very much anymore. So if you want to try and get one, you're gonna have to get on eBay or just look around on the internet for a while to find one. They're pretty rare nowadays, so. But they're really good if you can get a hold of them. I would highly recommend this if you're just starting into recording and you have old consoles that you want to run, or even like the PS2, the GameCube, the Wii. I mean, some of that stuff. It works really well. Also, you can, at least when I bought it, you could get a separate adapter that has Composite and S-Video. So if you have like an SNES that has S-Video, you could plug it into here, and things will work that way as well. You can get a little bit higher quality out of it. So it's a really nice option for just a basic capture card that runs 240p all the way up to 1080p. The problem with it is it doesn't run 1080p at 60 frames a second. It runs 1080p at 30 frames a second. If you do 720p, it'll run 60 frames a second, but that's kind of up to your discretion, I guess, on what resolution you want to use. So we'll go ahead and pause for a minute, and then we'll talk about the Live Gamer Extreme, the other capture card that I use. Now, the main capturing device that I use for recording games, streaming games, well, when we did stream games, now we just record games for the most part because our internet is not as good as it used to be when we were streaming games. So now we can only record stuff, but I've tried to make the quality as good as I can with recording for right now. So this is the Live Gamer Extreme. There is a version 2 now. This is version 1. Version 1 has a couple of different options that version 2 doesn't have. So version 1 has the option to do HDMI in and then also an HDMI out for pass-through, which when we were first recording and streaming stuff, we would use that a lot, just patch in a game and then patch it back out to the TV and then record on it. It also has a component in on the back, but it's a special cable that you have to use for it. It's included in the box, so you don't have to buy this separately, but it's this little adapter here. So it's got the component end on this side that goes into the Live Gamer Extreme, and then it's got the component YPVPR on the other side, as well as the audio. So it has that little breakout cable. Also in the front, there's an aux input and a microphone input on the front. We never use these, and I don't, because I use a mixing board instead for all the audio. So, and we'll talk about that in the last video of this series when we go talk about audio and how I hook all that up and how you might want to run some of your audio as well. This runs on USB 3. The other Game Capture HD runs off of USB 2. So you really do need a USB 3 port if you want to run this thing. I really like it. The only thing is it sometimes is picky with the Framemeister. Like sometimes the Framemeister will have some kind of sync drop or something like that, and then the LGX will freak out. So sometimes the LGX doesn't play nice with the Framemeister, but most of the time it does. So it's just kind of, I don't know, anybody's guess as to what's going to happen with that. But I really like it. It works really well. You can run HDMI or component. I run everything over HDMI if I'm going to capture something with this, just to make things easier and I don't have to fiddle around with the settings. There was, I guess, a point of discussion. There was a thing going on for a while where the PlayStation 3 in particular, I think, had this problem where there's a protocol called HD. I guess I need to look it up. 30 minutes later. So it's high bandwidth digital content protection. And so it's HDCP is the protocol. And it kind of prevents you from streaming or recording or, just kind of like, I guess, bootlegging certain content over certain connections, mainly with HDMI. So for the longest time, they were providing these component inputs so that you could record like your PlayStation 3 over component instead of over HDMI. Now you can still get 1080p out of the PlayStation 3 using component, but it's not as easy, I guess, as doing like HDMI or this kind of thing. And you have to constantly switch back and forth if you're doing certain things with recording. So it doesn't really make sense to use component now. There's ways that have kind of come about that you can get around that. So there's like certain things like certain splitters that you can use, and for some reason the splitters have the option to do an HDCP handshake on both ends of the connection, and then there's no problem. So it's not that it's really stripping the copy protection like some people say it's kind of like stripping the copy protection out. It's more like there's a handshake going on between the two ends of the connection, and it says, yeah, you're good to go on this connection. And for whatever reason, these splitters just will allow you to do that. And if you, I guess in some sense, circumvent the splitter or circumvent the high definition content protection, it'll let you record over HDMI. Now, there was such a big outrage with the PlayStation 3 having this problem that Sony put into the PlayStation 4 BIOS that you can turn off the HDCP, so it makes it easier to stream games now and record games. And I think for the most part, it's kind of, I guess, more or less agreed upon that since Sony put that into the PS4, that if you bypass it on the PS3 somehow, they don't really care, I guess. I mean, don't quote me on that, but it kind of just seems like the community and also the company, the way that they've behaved now just says, okay, that's fine. We understand you want to stream games, record games, whatever. So we'll give you the ability to turn this off for any reason. So, so there's that. You can do with it what you will. But that is out there in the community for splitting video for HDMI and also recording certain consoles as well. So, and I think that needs to be addressed, especially with a lot of these capture cards, because it's going to come up at some point or another. If you record retro games of any kind, you're eventually going to run into that. So, because you have to get up to HDMI to record stuff anyway at some point or another. So I just thought I'd mention that. You can do with it what you will. But I think especially for Sony, I think they kind of just admitted, yeah, that wasn't, not that it was wrong, but that, okay, we'll give you some options to turn it off because we understand that you want to record games and stream games on your consoles. So I think if we were to look at Sony's model, I think they kind of think that that's okay to record stuff using the PlayStation 3. But if you'd feel more comfortable just using the component, that's great. Or you can use the HDMI connection as well to record games that way. You might just have to run it through a splitter in order to get around the HDCP stuff. And I think AVerMedia, just as an aside, I think AVerMedia specifically says on their website, don't circumvent the HDCP, use our provided connections, the adapters and everything else. So I think they just want to avoid legality, and that's kind of the main thing here, is that HDCP just steps into a realm. If you can bypass it, it just gets into a whole legal thing of pirating stuff and stealing things and whatever else. So so just be careful and do your research before you stream games, record games. Some companies have different policies on that, and just be careful, because I mean, you might get in trouble if you're putting stuff up online. They might grab you for it under, X, Y, or Z reason. But I think Sony has at least specifically changed their policy a little bit since the PlayStation 3. So anyway, now let's go ahead and move on to just some basic recording stuff. I'll show you how I have everything set up. And yeah, we'll just give some examples of how to record in different types of quality, and hope you enjoy that. So now we're over here in the normal scene that you normally see us play games on. And I'm just going to briefly talk about a few items here before we talk about getting the Framemeister all plugged into this and showing different consoles and this kind of thing of what you might want to do. So one thing, you're not going to be able to really see what's going on my computer screen, and there's so many settings inside of OBS, and each person's setup is different. So you're just going to have to probably fiddle around with some of the settings in order to get things the way you want them. Just do some playing around and just get things the way you want them. And yeah, so the thing that I mainly wanted to point out with some of these capture cards, especially like these AVerMedia ones that are taking 240p and kind of converting them to either 480i or 480p, I guess, depending on what you're doing, is you're going to want to go into the options for deinterlacing. So once you have your AVerMedia all set up on your computer and you've got kind of some scene, whatever that is, and you've got it all connected and you see this no signal window, on OBS, if you right click on the LGX window, you can go into some properties, and in those properties, or you can kind of right click and it'll bring up a menu, I guess, and in that menu you'll see an option for deinterlacing. So what deinterlacing is with 480i and just interlaced sources to in general. So if you hear things like 480i, 240p, 480p, what's going on is that's a way that the picture is being drawn on the screen. So when you see an I afterward, that means interlaced, and what's happening is there's sets of fields on the screen, and the picture is being drawn every other field, and so then you get this like weird like flickering effect. It's really, really fast. So if you were to slow it down, it looked like the screen is kind of jumping around. But with P or progressive, the picture's being drawn, a whole frame is being drawn all at once. So interlaced is kind of alternating frames or alternating fields, and progressive, it's all drawn all at the same time. So everybody wants progressive image because it doesn't flicker and it's all drawn all at the same time. So each frame is one whole complete image. So what happens is when you take a 240p image and you convert it up to a 480i, it's going to flicker or kind of jump around. It's kind of hard to explain unless you see it, but it's like the picture's kind of like moving a little bit, or it's shuddering or this kind of thing. So you want to turn on deinterlacing to get rid of that. So in a sense, you're kind of converting the 480i image to a mock 480p image, I guess, but not really. It's not really upscaling it beyond 480i. You're just kind of like telling the computer you want to disregard a part of the image so that you can get it to look right. So, because the flickering on recording images is kind of annoying, especially when old game consoles that ran in 240p didn't have that. Now, if you record like the PlayStation 2 or something like that, yeah, it's going to have interlaced flicker. It's just in there. Anything that's 480i by default is going to have interlaced flicker. Some of the old PlayStation games had them, like the menus on Chrono Cross had them. So it was just part of the computer technology, or the TV technology at the time. But now we want to kind of get rid of all of that or normalize it or this kind of thing so that it's not annoying to look at when we upscale it. So if you right click on the AVerMedia LGX after the window is up, kind of like you have here, you have this no signal box. If you right click on that, there should be an option that comes up for deinterlacing. And then what I do is I select the deinterlacing mode called linear. It's also called bob deinterlacing, I guess, and it's a form of line doubling. So you're just doubling what field would be flickering, you're just doubling one of them. So in a sense, it stops flickering because it's just like duplicating every other line to create a mock progressive image. And that makes it a lot easier to look at on just any streaming equipment or recording equipment or anything. It eliminates a lot of problems. So it's just a good idea to use linear deinterlacing whenever you have something like the SNES or the Genesis that's been, or even like the PlayStation that's been scaled up from 240p to 480i to match the minimum requirements of your capture card. So anyway, the linear deinterlacing is the one you want to use. It'll eliminate all the flicker and you won't have any problems. Again, in like the Mega Man X races early on that we did, we used that option to get rid of it so that it was easier for you to watch. So anyway, that was the main thing that I wanted to point out, that if you're upscaling it from something that's not a one-to-one progressive to progressive or interlace to interlace type of connection, you'll want to do deinterlacing. And even if you're using some old consoles that run 480i, you might want to deinterlace anyway, just to get rid of the flicker. Some of the old Naruto videos that we have, we did some type of deinterlacing just because it was kind of annoying to look at on the video, and you would end up with some combing artifacts because it was trying to do a raw digital image that was never really supposed to be seen that way. So we just would use deinterlacing to kind of normalize the signal. But now that we have the Framemeister, we can kind of get around that. So the next thing I'll do is I'll show you how to use, or what we're going to use the Framemeister for showing video. So the first thing I wanted to mention was capturing RGB, because it's the highest quality that you can capture. So I've got my PlayStation hooked up over RGB, and you can see the image is really, really clear using RGB. Now, since it's a retro game, again, you know, it's going to look blocky, it's going to look pixelated, it's going to just look old when you upscale it. It's not like you're converting it to some like HD remake or something like that. So, I mean, if you want to play old games on a modern system, you're going to have to go out and try and find some HD remake that somebody has made. So in the case of Crash Bandicoot, that has been done. But for the sake of this video, we're doing the old version. So, but anyway, so this is what RGB looks like attached to the Framemeister. Now, this doesn't have any settings adjusted. This is just the default. I haven't gone in and adjusted anything. This is just all the default settings. So, and the picture is really clear. It's not blurry, because the first thing you're going to run into, and I'll show you this on some of the older consoles, I'll hook up all the way from RF to RGB. I won't do component because I don't really have things set up right at the moment to run component, but for the most part, at least with the PlayStation 2, RGB and component are pretty indistinguishable from each other. So what you see on the screen is going to be the same quality, whether it's RGB or component. It's just what you want to use in your setup. Like if you're not using old retro games or whatever, using component is a really good option. And even if you are using something like the SNES or the Genesis, you can use component cables to still get a 240p image, but it'll clean it up quite a bit to make it look more like RGB does when you see it. And again, this isn't running on an emulator. This is running on real hardware, and it looks like this. So anyway, let's go ahead and do some more examples where we load up some stuff maybe over RF first, and then go up to Composite, then S-Video, and then RGB again, and you'll be able to kind of see the difference between everything. Okay, so this is Mega Man X3, and this is running on real SNES hardware, and it's running Composite. So the image is really, really blurry. You can kind of see that just throughout the screen right here. This is what you're going to get if you just plug your retro console directly into the Framemeister using no no RGB or component or anything, it's going to look like this. It's going to be really blurry. But it is doable. I mean, you could run it this way. It's just a really blurry image. So that's what composite video looks like. So next what we're going to do is we're going to go up to S-Video, and also I'm going to do just like a kind of a side and aside for RF also, because my equipment's set up right now to run RF kind of on the S-Video connection. So you'll see what that looks like as well. So we'll do a couple more demos. Okay, so this is the SNES running Mega Man X3 over S-Video. So you can see that the S-Video is a pretty big jump up from composite. It's not super blurry. You can start to kind of make out some more of the detail without it being, really smeary or this kind of thing. So again, I mean, using S-Video is a pretty big jump from using composite. So, if RF is 0 and RGB is 100, then, using the S-Video connection is probably about a 40. Or maybe even a 50. I mean, the jump up from composite is like, composite's like a 20 maybe. So jumping up to S-Video is probably a 50. So it looks pretty nice. Using S-Video is a pretty big jump up from composite. So anyway, now we'll just kind of sidestep to using RF so you can see what that looks like. So the RF is going to look a little bit worse. Okay, so here's RF. So you can see that there's a lot of noise in the picture, which is just kind of typical of RF. You're always going to get some noise in the line. So, and depending on like what way you have the cable situated or this kind of thing is going to determine how much noise is in the line. I'm sure people that have played retro games are well familiar with that concept. So, but again, the RF is running over S-Video, so it still cleans it up a little bit. It's a little bit less blurry than composite, but it's not as clear as the normal S-Video connection is. So, I mean, you can run old consoles using composite into what I have here, a VCR, and then record that. But I mean, on this screen here where there's a lot of black, you can see a lot of the visual noise in the image. So, and also kind of just some things are not right with the picture. So you can do this method. I just don't really recommend it. I either recommend, just going with either straight composite or straight S-Video. Don't try and mess around with RF unless you absolutely have to, because it kind of does some weird, things with the picture. So it's just easier just to use composite or S-Video. So, and then finally we'll make the jump from S-Video to RGB. So, and finally, here's what RGB looks like. So there's no noise in the picture. It's not super blurry. It's just really crisp and everything is really easy to read, and it's just really nice to look at, especially if you're doing RGB on a PVM, a professional video monitor. It looks really nice. And also when you upscale it to your HD TV through the Framemeister, it looks really good too. So it's got that super pixelated look, and it's just really, really good. So again, the Framemeister works really well for 240p signals. 480i it kind of struggles with a little bit, and also 480p for some reason or another, but it does a really good job with 240p, and it'll work really well for a lot of your retro consoles. So anyway, that's kind of the image comparison between RF, composite, S-Video, and RGB. So again, if you're wanting to record games or this kind of thing, you first need a capture device, and then you need a way to kind of upconvert the signal. If you're doing any kind of retro games, you need a way to upconvert the signal from 240p or 480i up to a minimum resolution that your capture card will handle, and that varies from card to card. So I mean, the ones that I have require at least a minimum of 480i, with the exception of the Elgato Game Capture HD. It requires that you have just a 240p source. So there's not really a whole lot else to cover here. I just use the Framemeister as a signal normalizer to get everything up to 1080p so I can record it. But you can use a whole slew of different methods to get the image out of your retro consoles onto your capture devices, just as long as they're running over HDMI, and you'll be pretty much good to go. So if you have any questions or anything, please leave a note down in the comments section. And again, if you like this video, that's awesome. But that's really all there is to talk about for the Framemeister and capture cards. So just make sure you're using a minimum of what your capture card requires, and then just use what you have available. I mean, if that's composite and you want to record video, that's okay. You know, I started out recording, with Naruto when we first started recording stuff. That was using the Wii on Component. So because we had the cables right before we started recording stuff, I got the component cables for that. So, but there's stuff that we've done where we've done RF all the way up to RGB. So, and you can kind of see the varying results on our videos as well. So, but anyway, I hope this helps you understand a little bit more about resolutions and capture devices and the Framemeister. And I guess just as an aside too, you don't have to use the Framemeister. There are things like the OSSC or the open source scan converter that's really popular now, and especially too since JP21's kind of out of the running for normal cables and normal just normal setup anymore. The OSSC is SCART, so if you already have some JP21 equipment, you'll need to get some kind of converter to go from JP21 to SCART, but you can find those online. And you can just use that instead, and it does a really good job with most consoles. It has a little bit of trouble with the SNES, last I heard, but it does a good job with a lot of other things. So there's trade-offs like there is with anything. So the OSSC is a lot cheaper, and it's a lot easier to get than the Framemeister is. The Framemeister's got some components or like parts in it that aren't being made anymore. So once the Framemeister's sold out, it's gone. So there's no more getting it, unfortunately. But hopefully Micomsoft will come up with another XRGB unit that will be as good or better than the Framemeister is. So anyway, again, I hope you like this video. If you have any questions, leave a note down in the comments, and I'll do what I can to answer it for you. And we'll catch you in the next video.